Two people live in the exact same building, on the exact same floor, in nearly identical apartments. The person on the left earns $15,000 a month. The person on the right earns $5,000. But if you look at their heart rates when a surprise $800 car repair bill hits their inbox, the story flips. The high earner feels a spike of genuine adrenaline, a small financial heart attack. He looks successful, but is actually one bad month away from a total collapse. The lower earner? He doesn't shake. He has a system. Most people think money problems are solved by earning more. But in 2026, the data shows the opposite. The more you earn without a system, the faster you sink. Today, we aren't talking about saving money. We're talking about minimalist systems. It's not about deprivation. It's about optimization. It's the boring, clinical math that allows a $60,000 a year earner to retire 10 years earlier than a $200,000 a year executive who is addicted to stuff. If you've ever felt like you're making good money, but your bank account is suspiciously quiet at the end of the month, you don't have an income problem. You have a system leak. And the first step to fixing it starts with understanding that everything you own is currently charging you rent. Most people judge a purchase by the price tag. They see a $1,200 Peloton or a $300 coffee machine and think, I can afford that one-time hit. But as an analyst, you need to look at the secondary tax. Everything you own costs you money twice. The first cost is the acquisition. The second cost is the maintenance rent. Think about that treadmill sitting in your spare room. You didn't just buy a piece of gym equipment. You bought a long-term tenant. If you're paying $2,000 a month for a two-bedroom apartment, and one of those rooms is basically just a storage unit for things you might use one day, that treadmill is effectively charging you $400 a month in square footage tax. It's an unpaid intern for your stress. Minimalists don't judge items by what they cost to buy. They judge them by what they cost a house. Every object demands three things from you: space, attention, and maintenance. When your physical space is cluttered, your cognitive load is maxed out. You're spending brain CPU just navigating around your own stuff. This is why the disappearance test is so brutal. Ask yourself, if everything in this room vanished tonight, if it just ceased to exist, would you actually spend your hard-earned cash to replace it tomorrow? For 80% of your stuff, the answer is a cold no. Those items aren't assets. They're liabilities disguised as memories or potential. Removing them isn't a loss. It's a recovery of your most valuable resource: margin. When you stop housing tenants that don't pay rent, your cost of living drops without you ever feeling like you're poor. You're just finally running a lean operation. If the tenant rule helps you clear the clutter you already have, the cost per use algorithm is the firewall that stops the clutter from ever coming back. Most people are emotional spenders who try to use math to justify their feelings after the purchase is already made. They see a $400 designer jacket and tell themselves it's an investment. But as an analyst, you know that an investment is something that generates a return. A jacket is a consumer good that generates a utility cost. To master your money, you have to stop looking at the price tag and start looking at the utility unit. Let's run the numbers on two different lives. Case study A. You buy a $300 espresso machine because you have a fantasy self who wakes up at 6 a.m. to froth milk. But the reality is, you're tired, the machine is hard to clean, and you use it exactly 12 times before it becomes a permanent tenant on your counter. That's $25 per cup of coffee. You haven't saved money. You've invented a version of Starbucks that is more expensive and requires you to do the dishes. Case study B. You spend $150 on a high-quality pair of boots. They're expensive, sure, but you wear them 200 days a year for 3 years. That's 600 uses. Your cost per use is 25 cents. The secret to wealth isn't buying cheap things. It's buying high-utility assets. Cheap things are often the most expensive items you will ever own because their cost per use is astronomical. They break, they don't fit right, or they simply don't get used, meaning every dollar spent on them was a 100% loss. Wealthy minimalists are happy to spend $2,000 on a laptop they use for 10 hours every single day because the math is unbeatable. But they will refuse to spend $40 on a kitchen gadget they'll use once a year. This algorithm kills impulse buying because it forces your fantasy to compete with logic. When you're standing in the store or hovering over the Buy Now button, your brain is showing you a movie of how cool your life will be with that item. The algorithm pauses that movie and asks, how many times, honestly, will this be in my hands next month? If you can't get that number low enough to justify the price, the item is a scam. You are being marketed a dream, but you're paying for a liability. By adopting this one mental filter, you stop leaking hundreds of dollars a month on small purchases that aggregate into a massive wealth killer. You stop being a consumer, and you start being an acquisition manager for the most important company in the world, you. Here's a truth that most financial gurus won't tell you because it's not marketable. You don't make your worst financial decisions when you're greedy. You make them when you're bored. In the modern economy, boredom has been weaponized. Companies spend billions of dollars on UX designers whose only job is to remove friction between your impulse and your bank account. They want the Buy Now button to be so fast that your rational brain doesn't have time to wake up. They know that between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m., when your willpower is drained from a day of work and your dopamine levels are dipping, you are at your most vulnerable. At that moment, buying a new pair of headphones or a better mechanical keyboard isn't a purchase. It's a cheap hit of dopamine. It's a temporary escape from the monotony of the Tuesday night grind. We've been conditioned to treat expensive boredom as a hobby. We call it retail therapy, but for an analyst, therapy that drains your capital is just a bad trade. To beat this, you cannot rely on willpower. Willpower is a finite resource. It's a battery that drains every time you say no to a cookie or yes to a difficult email. By 9 p.m., that battery is at 1%. Instead of willpower, you need friction engineering. You need to build a system that protects you from your normal self. Step 1. The 72-hour rule. If you want something that costs more than $100, you are mathematically forbidden from buying it for 3 days. You aren't saying no, you're saying later. In 90% of cases, by the time hour 71 hits, the dopamine has evaporated and you'll realize you didn't actually want the item. You just wanted the feeling of getting something. Step 2. Digital decluttering. Delete the shopping apps. Remove your saved credit card info from your browser. If you have to walk across the room, find your wallet, and manually type in 16 digits, you've introduced enough system friction to allow your logical brain to intervene. Step 3. The replacement test. We often upgrade things that already work because a newer version exists. This is marketed as innovation, but it's actually just expensive vanity. The minimalist standard is functional is enough. If your phone still makes calls and runs your apps, replacing it is a financial emergency, not a tech upgrade. If you replace a $1,200 phone every 2 years instead of every 5, you're taxing your future self $3,600 over a decade on just one category of stuff. When you stop treating boredom as a reason to spend, you start treating it as a reason to build. The margin you save by not chasing the newest version of things you already own is the fuel for your enough number. You're choosing to be bored for an evening so you could be free for a lifetime. Here is the hardest pill to swallow in this entire system. If you do not define enough today, the world will define it for you tomorrow. And the world's definition of enough is always a little bit more than you currently have. Most people believe that higher income is the cure for financial stress. But without a ceiling, your life simply expands to consume every new dollar. This is why you see surgeons making $400,000 a year living paycheck to paycheck. They didn't build a life, they built a gold-plated cage. They upgraded the house, the cars, and the private schools until their fixed costs became a terminal illness. To exit the system, you have to do something radical. You have to set a limit on your standard of living while your income is still rising. This is the sovereign number. It is the specific amount of money you need to live a life that is 10/10 in quality without unnecessary bloat. Once you hit that number, every additional dollar you earn is no longer spending money. It is freedom capital. When you keep your expenses flat while your income grows, you create a wealth gap. This gap is where your freedom lives. You use it to buy back your time. You use it to handle an emergency without your heart rate increasing by a single beat. You use it to walk away from a toxic job because you don't need the next paycheck to survive the month. Minimalism isn't about being cheap. It's about being strategic. It's realizing that every unnecessary $100 purchase is actually a trade. You're trading away a piece of your future autonomy for a temporary object that will eventually end up in a landfill. The goal of this system isn't to see how little you can live on. It's to see how much power you can reclaim. When you own less, your expenses drop. When your expenses drop, your margin for error grows. When your margin grows, your stress vanishes. And when your stress vanishes, you finally have the clarity to build something real. So, here is your final task. Don't look at your bank account today. Look at your stuff. Find the one item that has cost you the most in attention rent and maintenance tax. Decide right now that it's the last time you'll let a tenant live in your life for free. Define your enough. Build your margin. Exit the system. I'll see you next time.